Greetings of peace and blessings, and welcome to the Divaan. Welcome to the Divaan of sorrow, joy, ecstasy, worn and torn hearts, love dogs, basically. We welcome everyone here, and we thank everyone for joining in our monthly Divaan. We basically consider this to be a poetic tavern, and with no very, we're very unscripted, we're very raw, and we just gather here and we basically have a topic. So today's topic is unrequited love. This came forth from a recent penning that we had in our penning space, where a poem was shared by myself, and our host Madiha immediately jumped on the bandwagon and started basically just saying that, elaborate. And she knows, she's been around for a while, and we learn a lot through her presence and everyone here. So it's an honor to have everyone here. Whoever is meant to has arrived, and whoever shall come will do so. Guru Ma Louisa, tell us.
So, yeah, I guess the topic of unrequited love can be, I was thinking about it when we announced it, like, is it a very sort of specific topic as to who does it interest, or is it a universal topic? Has everyone experienced unrequited love? What levels do we approach this from? And I guess especially in the wakings of what's going on right now, all the time in our news feeds and so on, like, is this a relevant topic? I also considered that. And then I guess it's where my thoughts lead is basically, it's like, it's as deep of a topic as we make it, and maybe one could even be so bold as to say, at the root of every sort of suffering or unwholesome deed or act, there is some form of unrequited love. There's some form of unfulfilled heart. There's some form of desire to be seen and heard and felt and understood that is not addressed in any constructive way. And in that light, the topic made sense to me as well, and I can kind of stand behind talking about that. And yes, I also think, like, we can approach, because it was so interesting when Madiha, you posed that question, like, and maybe Alicia, you could read that poem, because I'm not sure if everyone present even knows what we're talking about, and I also would like a reminder. And then, yeah, I guess the topic can be taken to a very sort of profound, fundamental level of the human experience, the human existence, and humanity at large. You're muted.
A love that is rejected or returned must be reinvested, not mourned. If the raison d'être was imperfect, love, or not the ideal, know then, no love is perfect. That was not the point of love or loving. Heaven is now. That's the poem that was shared. And then came forth, I guess, a topic that lurks in every heart, right? And this is a reoccurring theme in the way of love, in the way of loving, in the way of the heart. There are many who have experienced that. Sometimes it becomes a pattern, and sometimes it's just an experience that leads us to the opposite of that experience. And technically, if we were to look at it in a more defining way, basically, unrequited love is the complex and often painful emotion experienced in which one person's romantic feelings are not reciprocated by the object of their affection. I'm just reading a definition here, or suggested understanding. It can take various forms, from a crush on a friend who doesn't feel the same way to loving someone who is in a committed relationship with someone else. Unrequited love involves a one-sided romantic attraction, and it can have several facets and can be challenging to deal with. So that was just in a nutshell. Basically, in our divans, we have an interactive field of we know nothing, and we're here to sort of exchange and meet one another through ideas and experiences. And this path is really about not this, right? So we welcome everyone here in the space to basically engage and speak and share. We're here to learn, and just through the sort of talk that happens here, the sohbah, we learn and we expand in our consciousness, and then there's healing that takes place.
Okay. Salam, sisters. What do we do now? Are we sharing or?
By all means, by all means. Yeah.
Okay. So it was interesting that this topic came up, and I was contemplating or reflecting this week, since I've been in bed since Monday, on the topic of why are people acting in the way that they do, and how does it make me feel, be it men or women. And we were digressing, starting from my childhood um, wounds. And there were times as a child I did not know how to decipher emotions. So then I realized there's been a lot of talk of narcissism in school now or in society, and never had any clue what that was. I'm like, yep, 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 but I never resonated. I had no clue what it meant. And then it just hit me that narcissism to me just meant that people unconsciously act in such a way to harm others because they're very wounded themselves. They're wounded themselves. And sometimes it's in a subtle way of act, or sometimes it's just silence, or sometimes it's just spoken, but the person is aware that the harm is kind of done to the person, but because the person is a mirrored, is also feeling that injury. So coming back to the unrequited love from my father, let's say, or my mother. So I was always thinking, like my father, much as he was such a kind man, um, he had he was quite, and my mom used to say, oh, he's such a woman hater, he's such a woman hater. I'm like, no. But how would I know? Because I was a kid with all these emotions, right? How do I know? How does a man hate a woman? I was just seeing that it was just silence within the dynamics of their relationship. And sometimes he was kind, but as I grew up, there were words that were being spoken. And back to that, I realized he doted on his mother. I'm looking at it as a case scenario. He doted on his mother, but there were actions that even he said prior at one point in office, he had removed the mirrors from the woman's bathroom. And I'm like, huh? And apparently because the women were checking themselves out so much in the bathroom and like putting makeup and everything, so he just had the whole thing removed. And he was joking with me about it, he was laughing. I'm like, really? There must have been a resentment towards that. It must have been. Then I was going back in timelines today. He lost his father when he was 12. Out of 20 siblings, he went to boarding school. He was such a sweet soul, his younger brother said. And the minute he went to boarding school and he came back, something just happened. He just cracked. Like, he was an angry man. He was just speaking abusive, like, and he was just harsh. And so my mother lived through that. So he must have been bullied through school. And I understand all that. Maybe because I was bullied in school as well. So my uncle was quite sad, and he confided in me that your father just changed overnight. I lost my brother. So I had a conversation with my dad because I was conversed with him now. I said, what happened? And he refused to talk about it. It must have been that he was hurt by someone, he was made fun of, and at that time his father passed away. He could not align himself to respond. Everything was a reaction. He was at his weak point. So coming back along the lines of resenting women because he did, um, I grew up with that pattern of love and resentful. So I checked out the lines of my relationship, including my first engagement. Like, all these men that I've been, be it in colleagues or bosses or friends or school, the way they were treating me, and because I was also a wounded child, it was kind of, the remarks hurt. And was trying to give them love, or even to the extent, like my boss, he had leukemia, and I was just in nurturing mode, like, oh my God, this person, his wife passed away, what's happening to this person? And just finding doctors for him, and I get bullied in return. And I realized he shared with me later that he was wounded by so many women prior, that he doesn't trust women. And the marriage that he had just happened to be out of because he trusted this woman, which was completely somebody he would never pick. But bless her soul, she passed on. So the patterns that I wanted to burn really is about my understanding that there's narcissism, and the rejection that I had faced from childhood was because these people were wounded. Now, even with the current issue with Palestine and Israel and whatnot, in the capitalistic world, if your house was fulfilled with love, was so filled with love from both parents, again, you have a choice. You can either do your inner work, or some people don't get the chance to. If the house was so filled, greed would never you would never be compromised by greed. You would never be compromised by the power or whatever treats you're offered. You would never be compromised to hate someone or harm someone. Everything starts from the unrequited love from the mother and father. And so I'm learning all this. Having said that, even with women, like my grandmother, she was an orphan. I was just wondering, and she had to take care of her mother when she ran away. She took care of her looking for her mother, found her mother in the city paralyzed, and had to take care of her as an orphan. And she was just harsh, but she was a good-hearted soul. And I'm like wondering, why is she so harsh? until we realized that yes, she was not receiving love from the stepfather, etc., etc. um so it's the understanding of the tree of life. Now, how where do I stand right now? It's discernment. Yeah, I can't resonate now and give compassion to those who I feel are wounded, and hence my love was unrequited. But I do not need to give an excuse to them or let them come in my sphere. There's a boundary over here. Prior, the boundary was gray because I never discern. I'm discerning now. So, with a lot of compassion, even with regards to my relationship or coming one in the future, there's a discernment. There's some things that is not acceptable, irrespective whether you wounded. But I can share your compassion, but I'm sovereign as a woman and as a human being. And this is, I'm speaking for every single individual, every single adult, and every single children in this world. And with this, I'm complete. Thank you.
Interesting how you pointed out a pattern with the father and mother wound. Can anyone else comment on that?
I'm thinking of, and what Louisa said initially might be kind of related to this as well, of like we would call it the original wound of separation from love. And for me, this whole idea of unrequited love is that feeling comes from that wound for me, like that wound of the feeling of separation, being separate from the one I love. And last night I saw this video that's a lot of people are sharing on social media, and it's really stayed with me. In Gaza, there's complete darkness at the moment. They don't have electricity, they don't have light. And the video was of the mosques, and they're now communicating through mosque, the speakers in the mosque, I guess. And they're calling out, and they're calling out in this darkness, and it's almost like this calling out that's saying, can you see me? Do you remember me? Because I remember you. And it's kind of like a pleading for help and remembrance, but it also has this feeling of faith. Like there's like they know that they are being seen by the beloved, capital B, but they're also disappointed as well, in a way, because of that separation that they feel from the world at this time. And this is how I feel that unrequited love can feel as well. There's this feeling of separation, and that you don't remember me and you don't see me. But at the same time, if I see it from a bigger picture, I know that there's oneness, if that makes sense. Yeah.
So, is first of all, I feel for you, Nazia, and you know, it's when people are stuck in their wounds, because I don't think there's anyone who isn't wounded, or who hasn't suffered. At least I think everyone has suffered in some ways. But how do you move forward? How do you deal with the pain? And Madiha, I really like that example, the Palestine example, and I try not to get too immersed in the negativity of what's happening, because it can have a really profound impact. And sometimes you just have to pull yourself out and being the love, the unconditional love, and not be torn by. I know that sounds heartless, but you have to keep yourself. One has to become the light. I feel. Unrequited love is obvious is something it feels like home to me. It's like a pattern. You know, and you really can't help when you fall in love, basically, and then the other person thinks it's a disrespect of professional boundaries or otherwise, and then you feel like they're slamming the door on you, and it does feel like that, and for a while um you feel like you're meaningless, and everything just is so meaningless. But the flip side of that is it's like a purifying fire. You know, those of us who love intensely and foolishly, and I imagine all of us in this group do that in some ways. There's also this healing that comes through the suffering. You know, the profound healing, the um the grace in some ways. So it's never unrequited. The beloved is always there, always testing us, pushing us to embody deeper thoughts and consciousness, states of consciousness. So yes, it's a painful topic when you're in it, but then, you know, there's this sense of, you know, you're groveling in the dirt and you're, you know, throwing a tantrum, but then there's a moment of reflection and insight and profound gratitude. So anyways, that's my 2 cents.
Thank you for that. I really resonated with what you said, become the light and the unconditional factor. I think that itself becomes very much part of the necessary healing, because unrequited love is also subject to our interpretation. Since energy is not created or destroyed, who said that that love that you actually invested in was wasted? Or I guess what happens, and every experience is subjective, but love is always demanding for us to love and reach a point of unconditional love. And I personally believe that love is always returned. It's just, it doesn't have to be in the same form that we perceive or idealize. That's the only thing in art. Like Monet, he said that everyone pretends to love my art, or understand my art, sorry, but all that is required is to love it. So love is something that we have the power to own and be and basically choose, and no one can take that away. So in the case of, let's say, in the case of separation, I could comment on this, that it wasn't seeming like unrequited love, but when experiencing separation from a beloved, it took a long time, a beloved friend, it took a long time for me, let's say about 3 to 4 years, to come to realize that the remembrance is still as yesterday, right? So then who says that there is actual separation? Because as long as there is remembrance, then that love is alive with you, and that's a choice you have. And that freed me in my personal journey to realize that the ideal is to be physically with those we love and so forth. But love is actually beyond that, like it or not, because, you know, eventually we shall depart and we shall go separate ways in the journey of life. And love can be eternally experienced when we go beyond the ideals. So when you get into the zone of unconditional, and then, like you said, being love, that is very empowering, I feel, as a healing agent in whether it's unrequited love or otherwise. Yeah, I'm complete.
So I know this the spiritual guide or mentor that's passed on now, Ram Dass, he's talking quite a lot about love, and I can't quote him on this, but he was talking about how when you love someone and that person passes, when you can move beyond the grief and beyond the pain of not having that person present physically, that's when you kind of find the space where the love you have for that person is like still alive and never will leave, never will die. That place in you, in your heart, that person awakened is always going to live. And I'm thinking in relation to what you all have been saying about like being love, unconditional love, love comes back around, all of that stuff, like where is actually where is the place for relationship? And I'm not talking about only romantic relationships, I'm just talking about relationship, interhuman relationships. Where is that place within the so-called spiritual frame? Like, if the point is somehow to crystallize our beings, our hearts into these, you know, pure prisms reflecting love, that's kind of like I envision it somehow as like it's a conduit that just projects light or love outwards, spreads it outwards. So is there something worthwhile in a relationship where it's both receiving and giving? Like, what's the relationship between becoming a conduit for unconditional love and being human, being accepting of love or receiving of love? And somehow, personally, I feel that the more I get into the space of, like Nazia, you mentioned sovereignty, like self-worth, self-value, from not just from like an ego perspective, like no one can touch this, but rather from the like, yeah, you know, deep rooted kind of knowledge of I have a place in the universe type of thing, the less there is a need for others to love me. But then again, that also seems like it can't be that way. Energy transactions never work that way, that it's just like, one direction that energy flows. It has to be some kind of a dynamic motion. And like Alicia said, love doesn't disappear, it comes back. And now I hear a baby, so I'm gonna have to stop here. But I'm just wondering, what's the point of relationships if we're to be, unconditional beings?
I'm just something came up with regards to what Louisa was just sharing. I think, not that I think, I know we're all blueprints of the universe, and we're all coming from one seed, and we're all mirrors. And so the relationship with each and every individual, every being, even through the understanding of our ancestors, even through our relationship with the environment, it helps us come to the sovereign, to learn with ourselves, is not just being a recluse in a cave and just pouring out rainbows out there, because we don't know how to pour out rainbows if we don't recognize anyone. So by harnessing the energy of grace with one another, just through under I think it's harmonizing, really harmonizing that mirror. And so everything you see, everything you touch, everything you speak to yourself is literally a mirror of you speaking to others, and vice versa. When you speak to others, the way you act is not trying out, is not external, is a mirror. You're speaking beauty to yourself, you're speaking of love to yourself, you're carrying this level of vibration, and you're ascending into the sovereignty of that frequency. And then again, you come back and you see there's a repeated thing, a repeated pattern happening, which is necessary, like how I came to explore this week's study, how it's necessary. And I'm like, oh, there's a crack in my self-love, and I didn't realize it. I need to transmute it to allow myself to raise this vibration and seal in the cracks of love. So the interrelationships of people is necessary for us to harmonize this, hence dialogue. And if my act is repulsive to someone, okay, fine, let's figure this out. Why am I triggered, or why is this person triggered? Do I remind the person of someone who probably she or he was rejected from? So I feel, yeah, this absolute love comes in the harnessing of our interrelationship with every single person. And then there are phases of contemplation and self-care, and then coming out again into the world. Hence we were born and placed in a certain place, rather than being in Tibet up there on the mountains. They have their role. And with this, I'm complete.
Thank you, Vision Whisperer. Stop blushing. So I really, everything, mashallah, everyone is saying, it's all is in resonance. It's like listening to your own voice through another voice, and there's only one voice, and there's only one you, and there's only one reality. So every love we experience is only you meeting you. And that unrequited can be seen as like the easiest way to sometimes surmise or reflect in an introspective way is to basically sorry, give me a second. I'm a little bit ADD right now. Just had to do a little task. Is to basically see every experience as a mirror, you meeting yourself. So if something is experienced, i.e. unrequited love, to ask oneself, is there a part of me? Are there parts of me that I have not reciprocated? Have I not embraced or have closed off to myself? And love is always requiring us to do the inner work, right? There's always a dissolving required in love, dissolving until love says you are love. And I think like the greats like Mawlana Rumi is a prime example, because everyone's hearts relate, resonates with poetry of Mawlana Rumi, an embodiment of love. And he's eternal because till today we find peace and we find meaning in the works of this eternal being who became love in this non-eternal place. So the alchemy to become love, what is it that I'm trying to say? I'm just confused now, but going back to the idea of mirroring love, going back to asking oneself, what is it that I could do? Yeah, and that's it for now. Anybody else has anything to say?
Um, so with what you were sharing, something came up in terms of where energy never dies. We're just again spiraling, and we're spiraling. We're not coming back in circles. We're spiraling. We're cleansing the collective consciousness. We are elevating, and so this kind of consciousness of love consciousness coming up and becoming more absolute, because much as we're talking prior, or we were loving unconditionally, well, with wounds we don't really understand the inner stagnancy, that there are cracks, everyone is wounded, what absolute love means, which is love sovereign. And still we're learning and spiraling, and this energy is comes in multifold folds. It's like karma, right? You give money, you give something to others, you receive it tenfold. It's coming from the divine. And it's also the divine sequence when and where we do not know. It's just deepening our unknowing. Deepening our unknowing allows us to be in the ocean of the absolute. Deeper surrendering allows us to breathe in the absolute. And so when we just dive deeper within ourselves, this whole, even just by being still through this inner work, somewhere out there in another land, somebody can feel our consciousness. This is love clean. It's just like light from earth to the moon is travels what, 3 seconds, because it's so clean. And so this energy of love, as we collectively understand and collectively explore and collectively look into ourselves even more based on the externals are getting smaller, because as you shared, we're a mirror. this energy is going to come back in so much abundance because we are authentic in our exploration of love. We're never going to be hurt. Be allowed to be hurt. Light does not prevail in that way. It's a journey, knowing that we are all winners over here. I'm complete.
Reminds me of when it reminds me of the knowing that when Shamsit Tabriz was seeking a heart where he could pour himself into, he could not find that except for Rumi. And so that was equally the case with Maulana Rumi. So to have energetically that reciprocity, and if it hasn't been met, then why do we stop at unrequited? Do we have to overflow? Do we have to keep giving? Do we have to become the love dogs, right? And from my training, yes, you have to become, as they say in Urdu, a begharat. And I don't know what the exact meaning for begharat is, but it's like a shameless person, you know, who has no self-respect, who has no pride, and is just basically out to ruin him or herself. Yes, and this one should know because she's definitely a begharat. Okay, so yeah, so I mean, maybe, you know, we can ask ourselves if this is something that's a case. Does love want us to continue to keep going forward? Like, what, who said the marathon's over? Who said? So it could be a quest of the soul to find that container. And just because you assume that so-and-so person is that container, that's based on your limited understanding. Don't stop. Don't ever stop. Keep going. And it requires a lot of dissolving to do that, because you have to overcome your pride, and there's a lot of alchemy that has to take place. Why don't we focus though on a moment to think, and you could go as far as back as you'd like, to a point where you can affirm to yourself in this subject of unrequited love, where your love was met. It could also be, you know, something way back when you were a kid. And, you know, and I'm speaking not along the lines of familial love or friendship love. I'm speaking more along the lines of romantic love, where it was the container, or at least felt like it. Doesn't mean you're with that person now, but what was that experience that made you believe in love?
I just want to say, not to sound any, philosophical or whatever, the the greatest love that we are searching for is for our own selves. We are the beloved. We are seeking in others. And Louisa asked a really important question about relationship. And so this whole journey is really a relationship into our deepest selves, into our own precious beloved selves. And, yes, to become the love dogs, but then the energy of that doesn't mean that you constantly, denigrate yourself. It's not about, you know, constantly acting foolish. I mean, Majnun, even if you're all, I'm sure you're familiar with that story of Layla and Majnun, he realized that it's not the person of Layla he was seeking. There was something deeper and beyond. You have to strip yourself of all the conditionings that you think love is all about, and then meet yourself naked, stripped, torn, broken, wounded in that space, because what you've been seeking, what we are all seeking, is really our own precious, beautiful selves. And so for that to come forth, we have to go into a shadow world. We have to be comfortable with discomfort and pain and shame and all of these feelings that this kind of journey evokes in us. So the relationship begins first with ourselves. I think, Nazia, you pointed out how we talk to ourselves, how we view ourselves. And if we can view ourselves with compassion, regardless of our flaws, of our whatever foolishness and the ways people judge and the ways we've been conditioned to judge ourselves, if through all of that we can see the beauty and tenderness of our own spirit, and then you fall in love with that, because that's what we've been waiting for. Our own, each one of us, we are the light. So that's my 5 cents now. Not 2 cents, 5 cents.
Very profound. We have a poem that we'd like to share for the penning, but before we do, Louisa, I would just like to share one poem. That's what I was looking up when Ardos was speaking. If you just give me a minute, just pull that up here. Okay. It's basically it's basically what you said. We are seeking ourselves, essentially. A sub-Saharan journey into a ruthless desert. Accompanied by blue-eyed Tuareg, I questioned every grain. For what reason have I come? Enamored by my reflection, my glance befell a mirage. Seeking another, I saw myself. When my eyes met with mine, I knew none existed but me. I drank this reality till thirst receded. I uttered endlessly, there is no reality but me. No reality but reality, no reality but me. Basically, the point of that was to basically restate that sentiment and affirm that. So thank you.
So perhaps we can move on to the penning part of today's Divan. And since Alicia already mentioned the love dogs quite a few times, I thought also it's an appropriate maybe seed for today's reflection on the theme. So I could just read that, Love Dogs by Rumi, and then as per usual, we can just see what happens with that in the pennings. One night, a man was crying, Allah, Allah. His lips grew sweet with the praising until a cynic said, So, I've heard you calling out, but have you ever gotten any response? The man had no answer for that. He quit praying and fell into a confused sleep. He dreamt he saw Khidr, the guide of souls, in a thick green foliage. Why did you stop praising? Because I've never heard anything back. This longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you towards union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them. So maybe we take, what do you suggest, Alicia, 5 minutes?
Sure.
So I don't know if you all feel ready. I think Mahabba had to leave, and I'm not sure if there was someone else here as well, but is there anyone who would like to share?
Okay, I can share. They say you are what you seek. I say you are what I seek. I am that moth that has no interest in becoming the flame. I want to simply be with the flame. I'm not sure if I even want to be one with you. How then would I look into your eyes? I don't want to be honey. I want to taste it. I don't want to be the ocean. I want to swim in it. Perhaps I'm mad like Majnun, that prayed for God to increase his longing. I am no light, beloved. I am only longing that longs to dance with you.
May Allah increase your longing.
Ameen. That's not-
I'll jump in next. Melting into nothingness, I enter in you. I see pain, trauma, beauty, size, celebrating, fear, running away from, running to. I ask myself, how was I able to enter you? Well, comes the answer. It is the one who enters easily. She is the mirror. You see me as I see you seeing me. Come, we have work to do. Come, we have work to do. Let's traverse through our corridors of wounded rooms. Let us kick open the doors, and in all the mirrors of each, let's scribble on them with scarlet red lipstick. You are absolutely beautiful. Thank you for wrapping me with your beauty. I recognize you. Signed by Love.
I was thinking while listening to both of you, like I don't know, I sense there's like such a tender energy today in everything that's being shared, and maybe the topic brings forth that sort of openness and vulnerability from the longing, from the brokenness, from the mirroring, from the wounds, from everything. But I really like it's, of course, it's always like a virtual living room, but I really feel like it's very sort of, tangible.
What came to heart was remove the writer and who is speaking.
That's a poem in itself.
Like who is actually channeling these words through the vessel called you and I. Something to ask. Is love speaking to us directly through our poetry, guising itself in us, healing us through us? Louisa, would you like to share?
Here I can do that. I just want to be able to see you guys while I read. Okay. I feel more scared of not loving than of suffering. I feel more scared of not loving than of suffering. I feel more at home within the throes of heartache than within the peace of fulfillment. The tension between my longing and its object is what determines my life's goal. Without it, I'm like a stagnant pool, not flowing towards the ocean. But perhaps even within the stillness, I'm evaporating into a cloud that will rain down into the sea or into a river someday.
Or come forth as a teardrop from the very ocean of unity. That leaves moi, but to be quite honest, I didn't compose anything. I just wasn't inspired. So I'm like, I have cheats from my, old poems on my secret little blog here. So I'm going to share something. And after that, if I am inspired, I'll just say something. Not written. If there is anything I believe in, it is love. I do believe love will not leave me to the dogs. Love will grant every lover a final retreat in love herself. The end.
It's a beautiful completion, mashallah.
I wanted to, before we wrap, we have about 15 minutes left. If we were to work with our timings, I wanted to just discuss here, there's, in the healing work that we do and dealing with all sorts of different hearts and what people go through and so forth. This idea of the unrequited love. What would you all advise someone, for example, if he or she does not move beyond that love, even though the object of his or her love was not reciprocated in that very window of time, and that person supposedly moved on, but the lover hasn't and remains forever in that energy field while life goes on and people come and go, and it's just that person that person is just fixated on. And knowing how the hearts sort of work to tamper with someone's emotion or to operate in ways that are inorganic, so that in the name of healing, so that person could, move forward or just go on with life. Like, what would you recommend, or what? I mean, I don't even know if this is the right way to pose the question, but what do you do, and what do you say to a heart like that, on that level of devotion, you could say?
Do you mean, sorry, do you mean that what advice should we not, what advice would it be? Let me rephrase that. Is it about giving advice to the person who's still stuck,
Yeah,
or the person who's still stuck
but they don't think they're
with
stuck.
another party? With another
Yeah,
party.
yeah, they don't think they're stuck. They're stuck on the love by a third, like anyone who would
Mm,
know of the situation, whereas they don't think they're stuck,
mm,
albeit the other person or the object of their love has technically moved on. And
mm.
that too is, it's always subjective, but yeah.
So again, organically, right? I things you don't want to push force unless, respectfully you're being asked for the advice. So some women, or some, forget about women or men, some people just don't see it when they're not ready to see it, and they don't see it because they're not ready, and it's not time yet. And maybe it's the alternate way of happening organically, by a lack going into the subtle focus of self-love. If the person goes into the study of self-love even more, the answers would come naturally through that, via someone just start directing in such a way, because it's denial. Simple as that. People do see, in your heart or within you, there's the intuition that this is happening, but no, I'm not ready to see it. And because of my own stagnancy, or my own wounds, or my own fear. So it's all about the quality of self-love, of which we're continuously exploring, even as we share right now. So, like, how much self-love, how much beauty do you see in you? um how much beauty do you see in you? Complete.
Thank you. Madiha, you recommended a book last time, right? Perfect Love. Is there anything you can extract from there on this subject?
Yeah, I was just trying to recall the book. It talks about that wound that I was speaking of earlier, the wound of separation, and how love is perfect, but relationships often aren't, and those are two different things. And so for this, theoretical person that we're talking about, who feels a lot like me, um, my advice would be to separate the attachment to form from the love. And then the attachment to form is something that needs to heal. And the love has to be given space to just be, and for it to run its course, and for it to transform us. Because for me, I've not separated the two, and I've at times tried to suppress or reject the love. And when I do that, I feel like I'm separating or rejecting a part of myself. So I feel like the attachment and the love have to be worked on differently. If that makes sense. Yeah. And then for me, like working on the attachment aspect, inner child work has really helped me, because I feel like our attachment patterns really come from our childhood. So, and for me, like therapy, like verbal therapy hasn't really helped too much. I feel like I, got to a point where it was just not helping me. So like somatic work has really helped me, where I like tap into my body, and with the help of a somatic therapist, guide. That's something that is helping me now.
Thank you. Louisa, do you have any words of wisdom?
I guess, first of all, maybe a bit like Nazia said, like, are they asking for advice? Are they themselves concerned with the situation? Because there's so many different ways to not let go of an unrequited love. And I think there is also, there's this narrative that society somehow paints, that the only successful love is the love that somehow ends up in a committed, and depending on the society, like whatever, of course, the religion and so on is there, but like a halalified established relationship, and that's like the goal, and then it should end when someone dies, and anything else is a failure. So I'm also thinking, like, is this person suffering from being attached to this love, or are they happy with loving that object of their love? And if they are, then what's the point of trying to change that? And if they're not bothering that person, and if they're not, becoming a menace to that person, then it sounds to me like they're basically just loving. And of course, like, one can always become pragmatic and be like, yeah, but you could, if you just let go of that, you could, maybe make space for becoming happy with someone else. But then that's also like, is happiness always the ultimate goal of, like, that's maybe also why I posed the question, what's the point of relationships? Like, are they there to make us feel, good? Or are they ultimately there to reveal ourselves to us? And maybe there's nothing that compares to this. For whatever reason, this form has become the symbol for that highest love that this person can fathom. And then why would you need to remove that? If that's the highest love they can somehow see manifested in the world, then why take that away? Even if it's not resulting in a societally acceptable, oh, we're getting married and, having kids and, happily ever after. Maybe that's not the point. But again, if they're suffering from it and they're actively wanting to move on, that's a different question. And I don't know how to do that, because I never learned how to do that apart from, I guess, just either being fed up and realizing I'm stuck on a level that I don't want to be stuck on, and that itself has propelled me forward into something new, which feels like a higher station of maybe self-realization or exploration, or another manifestation of love has appeared that again has just allowed me to, feel that sort of love, devotion in an even more, I don't know, nuanced form, maybe, because it seems that it's always about leveling up in the, I don't know, the way we love, the depth we love, the dimensions that we can encompass while we love. So if that doesn't happen, I don't know if it's possible to release either, you know, either finding something for themselves that's tapping into that even higher perspective, or another manifestation in another that would allow that. But otherwise, why not just hang out in that state? I don't know.
Yeah. So if I was to basically consider everyone's 2 cents, what came to heart was the following, that and I know that in the radical way of loving, as explained beautifully always by Dr. Omid Safi, he talks about radical love, which is an overflowing love. And he said the greatest sin, according to those who subscribe to the ecstatic school of love, or the school of radical love, it's just not coming to me. There's a sober school, right? And then there's the ecstatic. So the greatest sin for the ecstatic lovers was to separate or create a duality, a separation between mortal and divine love. That's the biggest sin ever, because love became and becomes the experience of divine love on earth, right? In the way of the mystic way, the emphasis is on the mortal love as a means to the divine, and to experience divine. So that said, I was with a therapist maybe 2 weeks ago here, and just a friend of mine, basically. So we were talking about this idea, and she herself was 17 years, because she was engaged to somebody at a young age, and it was broken off by the other person, opted to marry somebody else last minute, and moved on, had a family, and so forth. But that person, my friend, never moved on, and her love intensified, and yeah, the seed just was watered, and it turned into a big fat tree, right? The tree of life. It gave her life. That love gave her life, because in the absence of life, you have no reason to, in the absence of love, sorry, you have no reason to live. And for many, the object of love, whether it may come across as obsessive love, right? Is the only way to survive for a heart that needs to love, because we came from love and we return to love. And if, you know, that mortal or immortal becomes like, you know, plants itself into our being, then so be it. It's like, why would you remove the tree of life from within you? You know, if the seed was, you know, being watered and grown. So that's one thing. So that therapist or that friend said, usually in the case where moving on, which she, I think, didn't agree with either, to be honest. She said it's usually, because she's talking from a psychological perspective, and she said it's usually same or more in order for you to move on, because your system or your being would not gravitate to something unless it's higher. I wouldn't even say equal, because she said equal or higher, but I would probably agree. I don't know about everyone here, but something higher. So that's one thing. That's one point. Second point is I don't know if I might have brought this up before, but I definitely did on a penning class workshop, and I talked about the series that, you know, I remember as a kid. It was in our days like an old series. It was called I Dream of Jeannie. Right? Right? So what I just want to say is that imagine your heart. Now, I Dream of Jeannie was about this like genie person, and she was in love, or her boss or whatever, her master was in love with this genie like human being and whatnot, but they had this relationship, and she lived in a bottle, a glass bottle, and it, like, the way that the show would have it is that, you know, there was a nice interior setup, like it was like a living room, right? The sofa set was there, really orientalist sort of sentiment going on there. And so she was on these, imagine these luxury Turkish Persian sofas with the rugs and all that. So imagine your heart now, that space where it is the ultimate divane ishq. It is the divan, is the assembly, it's the court of love. Okay. And that is not allowed, like nothing but the truth, nothing but truth, and nothing but the highest version of love or whatnot can enter that space. So now you are the host, and you have the finest interior, and love comes to your door knocking, and you've allowed it to come in. So being that gracious host, do you kick that guest out? Do you ask it to leave? Just wondering. So in the case of this individual, or anyone who's basically suffering or not suffering, or living, basically living with love, should you ask it to leave? Does it need to leave? And when the time comes, then let the guest leave. Could we just leave it at that? Guess it depends on what's happening to that person, but I'm just saying, if it's not in the case of, you know, like Louisa said, harming the other person, or where it's if it's no consequence to anybody, and even that individual himself or herself, then perhaps the necessity of the guest to stay is necessary until the guest needs to leave organically. I don't know.
Could be that, or again, it's denial of self-love. Like, how much do you really love yourself? Again, like what Louisa was sharing, there's a, maybe that's the ultimate perception of what the relationship of love is. And like how you shared I Dream of Jeannie thing, the setting, the sofa, the thing that is the mirage being lived. But is that ultimately the self-love? Or again, is there a compromise being made? And again, talking about harm, there's a lot of forms of harms that we normally do not distinguish. It may not be physical, but if this subject has been brought upon, then there must be a disturbance either mentally or emotionally in the psyche that brought forth this question. Otherwise, it's just like knocking on the neighbor's door. Hey, you know, I don't see your relationship working. Kick the guy out. Something must have brought about this situation to our light at this moment, that we see there's kind of a misalignment here, because we see like elderly generation, some of them just live by in their comfort zone. Do they look happy? Some of them not, but they're in denial, but they still live through it. So again, is factoring in the actual situation in detail of what is self-love of the person, what is harm. I know that I had an aunt who and I'm fine with sharing personal stuff because it's just a reflection of me and getting to know me. Like my aunt, she had an abusive husband, her second marriage, not harmful, but not physically harmed, but again womanizing, etc., going through whatever, and she was supporting him in London. And you know, one time it was just he was doing something, he ended up in jail in England or something. And of course she had a ranking in the embassy, so this was and people knew her as jovial, like she was really the funniest person in the whole embassy, like really funny. But then in her house there's wounding, and I ask her, like, how do you deal with all this nonsense? Like, how do you deal? And she says, yeah, but he loves me. And everyone could see that no, he doesn't. He kind of has gone through all the whole, you know, thing outside, but in her mind, he loves me. Nobody could say anything. And I just kept quiet at that until things started getting really dire. And now she's alone. She's separated from him. He's remarried. And she understood, what on earth was I thinking? Like, I didn't love myself. Hence, she's so much happier. She was like, no, it was just mental abuse and denial. But at that point, could people push? No, because it would be a reaction. But it was subtly allowing people to, you know, the signs coming in. To what extent? Um, I remember being always the one to probably talk to her um, on this issue of love and stuff like that, and meeting her in other places. So yeah, you know, it's understanding that there is a bigger thing beyond, and who knows, but the alter, but so you don't just allow love to come in and you're a host, you're guesting the person. No, it's kind of also seeing who you're attracting, right? You're attracting. And I think we had this conversation. You have a palace, and this is what I'm studying as well. You have a palace, you bring a clown into the space, the palace will turn into a circus. So but it's your crack again, it's your self-love mirror that you got to work on. And it's not just a physical home space, it's also your entire weave around you, circle around you, they're reflections of you. So I'm complete. Thank you.
Interesting analogy. Thank you so much. Something to reflect on. And I think with that, we are for now complete. And I'm sure we have a lot to ponder over. And I thank everyone for today's gathering. Appreciate it. And until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.